In preparation for today's sermon, as I often do, I was doing some internet research. This Sunday gets a little more research than others, actually, as it turns out. And I came across a comedian by the name of Mike Goodwin, who had something that I thought was incredibly powerful and profound that I want to share with you. If it's profound to somebody like me in my vocation, I suspect it might be profound for you as well. And here's what he had to say. He said, really, there's only two things we have to worry about in life. And that is, are we healthy or are we sick? If we're healthy, we have nothing to worry about. Go look up Mike Goodwin online so I don't get sued for copyright on that one. But I thought that was helpful to set the stage for today. Yes, it is that Sunday again, which many of you know, which is why the church is full on the Sunday after Easter. Many of you know what's coming. But some of you, I think, are new among us, visiting today, not been here for the Sunday after Easter before, and you're not really sure, probably from the music we heard before church and the bulletin, exactly what's going on. And I'll leave you in suspense for now and explain it in a few minutes. For now, it's a little early for the laugh, Ashley. Come on. For now, I'll point out that this is the Sunday every year where we get the same gospel story. Every year on the Sunday after Easter, we hear of the disciples locked away in fear. They don't understand what has happened to Jesus, why his body is missing, and they're scared. And it doesn't click into place for them until Jesus appears behind those closed doors in his resurrected form and tells them that they should receive the peace that he repeats again and again. But as we know each year from the story, Thomas isn't there the first time that Jesus comes back. And he has trouble believing what his fellow disciples tell him about that appearance. A struggle, I think, honestly, all of us know something about. It can be hard at times just to believe. It is such a common part of the human condition. We have products with the word believe in their name, like at the grocery store. I'm sure you've all seen. Some of you may use, I can't believe it's not butter. Now, they have that name because it turns out there is a range of flavors that we are willing to accept as butter, and they can trick us. It goes all the way from like the high-end Irish cream butter all the way to that orange stuff they spray on popcorn and call butter. But there comes a point at which people begin to believe it may not actually be butter. You may have heard it described as the margarine of error. So the disciples, before the first appearing of Jesus, they were just like Thomas. They weren't sure what had happened to him. They didn't know what to believe. They saw him die. They knew that he had been laid in a tomb, and they knew that the tomb was empty, and that's about it. And when somebody disappears like that, it is unsettling, to say the least. I knew a guy who evaporated once. He was missed. You probably don't believe me about that at this point either, and that's okay. It's not the first time people have had trouble believing me. There was the time, for instance, I had been working on my autobiography, and when I was printing it out, I had a little accident in our office at home, and somehow I managed to get all the pages glued to me. And I was calling out to Donna to come help me get all this stuff unstuck, and as she was coming up the stairs, she couldn't believe what I was telling her either. But when she got there, I said, look, this is my story, and I'm sticking to it. Which is exactly what the disciples do, and Thomas doubts what they have told them. And Thomas, for his part, doesn't believe and sticks to that as well until the second time that Jesus comes. And we get it, because Jesus' missing body, not having had a chance to see it, for Thomas's part, is a big deal. You can't properly mourn. There's no place to go to mourn Jesus if his body's not there in the tomb, and I think some of us know that as well. It's very hard to have a proper funeral without a body and to have that moment of closure and mourning. I think all of us are in mind of funerals this week after a very famous funeral in particular that got lots of coverage. I don't mean the Pope this past week. I mean the man who invented throat lozenges. There was no coffin at his funeral either. Which still went better than that other funeral last week for the inventor of Tupperware. They meant to have the service last week, and I read they had to postpone it because they're still looking for the lid that fits the coffin. But what if Jesus hadn't shown up? What if he hadn't come to the disciples behind closed doors? What would have happened to them? What would have happened to the church? Would we even have a church, because I really don't think so. Sometimes things just don't come together the way we think. I was reminded of a time in college when I set up a first date with a young woman at the gym, which I know is a kind of a weird place to have a first date, and she thought so too because she didn't show up. It's okay. That's when I knew we weren't going to work out. We take it for granted that Jesus rose from the dead. We take it for granted that he appeared to his disciples. We take it for granted that he breathed his Spirit into his followers and didn't just give them peace, but what they would need to go out and build the church and proclaim the good news. Would just have fun with each other. They would play tricks. Would just have fun with each other. They would play tricks and jokes on each other. They would tell jokes. They would dress up in costume. And the idea was to be as happy and joyful as possible. Because as the teaching goes, in the cosmic sense, Jesus and God got the last laugh on the devil on that Easter morning. And so we laugh and we lean into the joy of Easter as a way of recognizing that truly there has been this incredible gift of life that is ours. And it should make us smile and it should make us laugh. So now that you know what's going on, should I go on? All right, nobody's thrown anything or gotten up. That's good. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned the Pope. And not being silly here for a second, I really was grieved, as many of you were, to read of Pope Francis's death. He was a lovely man who did a lot for the Catholic Church and for Christians around the world. And so that was a moment of introspection and prayer, I think, for all of us. I don't want to take away from that, but I do have, unsurprisingly, a Pope Francis joke to tell in his honor. Do not worry. It is not bad. And I don't think that folks from St. William's are going to come with pitchforks and torches to get us as a result. Trust me, if you can. So here's how it goes. One day, Pope Francis dies and finds himself at the pearly gates, where God himself comes to collect Francis and welcome him into heaven. And he takes Francis to his cloud and says, "This will be yours." And then he leaves. And Francis is there, and he's got his harp, and with nothing else to do, he sings songs praising God, because that's what we do in heaven, right? And then after some time, hours had passed, God comes back to Francis's cloud, and he's got this silver tray, and on it is a can of tuna fish and a sleeve of saltine crackers. And that's the meal for the day. And that gets repeated for days for Francis, that as he's there on his cloud, God comes once a day with his meal, and it's always on the silver tray, this can of tuna fish and some crackers. Well, one evening, the clouds sort of part enough that Francis can look down, and he can see all the way down into hell down there. And he sees the devil stoking this enormous barbecue pit, and they're cooking half cows and pigs and all kinds of things, and there's wine being poured, and there's feasting going on with an abundance of food, and then the clouds close up and he can't see anymore. So the next day when mealtime comes, God comes with the silver tray and the tuna fish and the crackers, and Francis is grateful for it and thanks God. And then his curiosity can't be held in much longer. And he said, "Lord, in your omniscience, how can it be that they're down there feasting like that? And I'm just getting this tuna fish and these crackers." And God looked at Francis and said, "Do you really expect me to cook for just the two of us?" See? Not so bad. As it turns out, there are a lot of heaven and hell jokes if you start looking for them. I think because it's an ongoing concern for us it's just a really cool thing to think about, that you get to see the growth of God's kingdom in that way, if just for a second before the next person is baptized somewhere else around the globe. And I love, although we'll baptize any age, one's going to be about 3, and the younger sister, she's, I think, 1-ish. I love baptizing little ones, and I love having little ones in church, too. We've had a few more lately, which has been lovely. And it's always fun to see how the congregation interacts. Inevitably, when a child is in church and they're active, somebody behind the mother, when they've got them on the shoulder, or the father, is going to try to play peekaboo with them. And you can see it from up here, and it makes us smile as well. But I always get nervous, because you could have some really strange injuries while playing peekaboo. And you have to be careful because they can only be treated a certain way. If you get an injury while playing peekaboo, the only place you can go is the ICU. But I do appreciate baptisms as well because it means a parent has chosen to raise their child in the church, to take the faith that they apparently hold dear for themselves and find ways to instill that in their child, to imbue that child with the faith of the church and the understanding of the good news that we proclaim at Easter, and that they will be raised without knowing anything apart from that love and that story of God's love and reconciliation. We all need to know God for ourselves, because when we don't, it can be really unpleasant. I went to my neighbor to borrow a stepladder because I had to change a high light bulb. And I said, hey, do you have a ladder I can borrow? And he said, yeah, let's go into the garage. He said, there's my stepladder right there. And as I was picking it up, I was amazed to hear him mumble under his breath, yeah, I never knew my real ladder. Oh. Yeah. So, the gift of Easter that we are given by God is like anything else. It is unmatched. It's like the beauty of Mount Rushmore before they started carving on it. If you've ever seen those historic photos of what that little outcropping looked like, it was unprecedented. So I better wrap this up because some of y'all are getting tired of this. And when the laughter dies down, I know that I'm in danger. There was a time in school I learned that when we had an anatomy lesson to put the human skeleton back together again, and I thought it would be funny to hide the arm bone as a joke, but nobody found that humorous. But maybe this year's Holy Humor Sermon Sunday will be like last year's. I got at least one good review last year from somebody who called it pretty. Okay, truthfully they said pretty awful, but we try to focus on the positive, right? And I hope I haven't mangled the gospel too badly while trying to cram in as many jokes as possible. Because sometimes you can just chew it up so bad that you can't recognize it anymore afterwards. If you've read in the Smithsonian Magazine about those pencils they found in England they thought might have been Shakespeare's, that may have been used to write some of his most famous sonnets, but apparently he was a pencil chewer, and they were so badly chewed they couldn't tell if they were to be or not to be pencils. So it is time to finish. I started this sermon by sharing that little piece from Mike Goodwin about the two things. And we do ultimately on the Sunday after Easter get the reminder that we can choose between two things ultimately. In the face of all of our doubts and the pain and struggles of this life, in the face of a world that is broken by sin, as I preached about last week, we get to make a choice in what we want to embrace, what we want to believe, and what we're going to do with the resurrection story that is passed on to us and the life that comes with it. Because we're not dead, we're very much alive, most of us at least, and we have a long way to go. We don't need to be worried about heaven and hell and which one we're going to find ourselves in, and it's really not a question of heaven being mostly empty. If anybody's eating tuna fish and crackers, it's probably on the other end of the spectrum. And so as we make this choice, we can choose to just, in the face of all the things that stack against us, give up and quit on life. Or we can choose to keep going and embrace the good news that we find in this place and in this gospel. No matter what we choose, both are going to involve continuing moments where we are hurt, continuing pain. Both will include suffering and loss over the rest of our life. There's no way around that. But only one of the things that we choose can also bring with it the joy and the hope and the promise of a new life in Jesus Christ. We have to choose joy. If we don't seek it out and choose joy for ourselves, you know what? You still get all the brokenness of the world. You just don't have the joy alongside it. So I hope we choose wisely. And I hope we keep laughing.
Let us stand as we are able and affirm our faith in the words of the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, the Father,